Dear Mrs. Manabaya, again I am pleased to be with you today. Today we are eager to get information about a quite unknown special missionaries whose history is very important to know about. His work in life is embedded and entangled in tragedy and ended, sadly, Georg Schneider. You, Mrs. Bayer, in your younger years had personal contact with him and the descendants of him, better to say so. He was trained as from 1909 onward here at the Missionary Seminary, as we can see on the picture here, where he also acted in a mission orchestra, the person far at the right in the picture. Commissioned in 1913, he was to serve then on the Lutheran mission field in New Guinea. And after his furlough in 1924, he did not persevere in his service in the Finschhafen region in New Guinea and on the Thiassi Islands, but shifted to the western part, called then Dutch New Guinea. The most important facts are recorded in this handbook about the Neuendettelsau mission. Reverend Dr. Christian Weber and myself, Frau Farnbacher, have compiled this book to help that core information about the Neuendettelsau mission will be persevered and perceived and remain accessible. Only very little is compiled about Georg Schneider in those books. Martin Bayer, with her excellent memory, will tell us what she knows about his life, fate and the family. Georg Schneider was born in Kitzingen, northern Bavaria, and most of his life was committed to serve in the mission. Can you please tell us how you came about to know him or get in contact with his family?
Oh yes, I know quite a bit about the Georg Schneider family, starting with his children Fritz and Louise, who were my classmates here in school at Neuendettelsau in the 1930s. Both of them lived in the boarding place called New Guinea Children's Home. Both of them lived in this boarding place that served for children whose parents worked in New Guinea, most of them being separated for many years from their parents due to their mission services. In the case of Georg Schneider, he has served also in Dutch New Guinea, quite unusual for missionaries sent by the former Lutheran Society to New Guinea. It could be that there was a request from the Reformed mission in that western part of New Guinea for a missionary. That call he then took up for the second part of his service as from 1925 onwards. These two children, Louise born in 1928 and Fritz in 1929, were about my age group. I do very well remember how tough and even disturbing it was for them when they had to be accommodated in the children's home here from 1935 onwards, after the renewed term of their parents in Dutch New Guinea.
So you know them both from that time?
Yes, they ended school in Neuendettelsau in the same year as me, in 1935 onwards. Then we got to know stories about the life of their parents. My father and their father were trained in the same missionary seminary of Neuendettelsau. We got acquainted with their quite different situation in their very young life. And being a missionary daughter by myself, I could much better understand them, and we did communicate and share what we and our parents experienced. My father had passed away when I and my twin sister Hedwig were still very young, so we could sense what it means to have no contact anymore with one of the parents lost. But thanks to God, my mother Sibylle to look after us and our older sister with great love and care. The Schneiders had a younger daughter born just before their term break in 1935. Mathilde, who due to her young age had to return with her parents in 1935 to Dutch New Guinea for a third term.
It is very interesting to hear about those connections, and we just have seen the photo again, connections dating back to the missionary engagement in New Guinea in its early stages. Yet, why there is so little known about Georg Schneider and his wife in our records, history books? Could you tell us something about the tragedy of his life and work?
Well, when World War II hit also New Guinea, German missionaries were interned in Australia. This was not the case for Georg Schneider because he served with a reformed mission in Dutch New Guinea. The Dutch, when World War II started, took a hold of all German citizens working there. Engineers, farmers, traders, also missionaries, with a plan to ship the captives to India to an English camp. This happened in 1942. 3 Dutch ships with such a mission started their voyage towards India. On each ship were about 500 German prisoners on board, also on the ship called Van Imhoff. The crew was entirely Dutch and numbered about 100.
Yes, so the plan of the Dutch was quite clear. And you had also mentioned that there were animals on that ship, on the same vessel.
Yes, the prisoners also, as I was told, were locked into very narrow cages at the lowest deck when even was not a proper deck. Those in the low deck had terrible conditions, extreme heat, and the animal stock was even put in a deck above them in better condition than the prisoners. Very stinky, very unpleasant. Of course, the Dutch crew was located at the upper decks. When the prisoners tried to get out from the miserable cells, they were pushed back by the armed crew. My sister had heard a report of an engineer who was employed by the Siemens company from Germany and who miraculously survived the transport on another ship safe.
So the situation of missionary Georg Schneider was very tough and very difficult.
Yes, the ship with the missionary and all others on board was hit by a Japanese torpedo. The captives at the lowest deck were unable to get out. Rather, they heard hectic voices and movements on the ship deck. Suddenly there was silence, and they felt that the ship was about to sink. Somehow they ventured to make it to the outside, since no stuff could anymore keep them back. There was no crew left. They had boarded most of the rescue boats and most of the others. Also did they destroy all technical equipments of the sinking ship. But the German engineers among the prisoners were able to activate at least the wireless system and made an SOS call to any ship in that region to come to save them. One ship, a Dutch one, did respond to that emergency call. Some of the engineers were also able to repair one of the rescue boats.
Where did that happen? And did the Dutch ship come to rescue the prisoners which were abandoned? What about the other boats or other ships passing by?
I believe all this happened in the vicinity of Sumatra, since the vessel had already travelled for many days. When the other ship came close to the sinking ship, the crew asked the people on board if they were Dutch at all on board. As the prisoners denied that, the vessel turned away suddenly and left the stranded passengers struggling for survival. The repaired boat could only allow 10 persons to enter. Georg Schneider was not given a chance. There was a Catholic priest on this boat who survived and gave his report later in Neuendettelsau.
So this was, from my understanding, a kind of war crime, because to leave nearly 500 prisoners of war to their doomed fate, and then the dying ones on the ship which was bound to sink. Did you hear that account of the priest yourself?
No, it was my mother Sibylle Bayer who attended his report in a mission center, and she told us about the terrible experience. She was very shocked, which I do remember very well. As the priest said, many of the desperate prisoners in the ocean tried to get into the repaired boat, and it was awful, as the priest said, to realize that there was just no space for them. They even had to push them back to prevent the small rescue boat from sinking also. More than that, the suction of the sinking ship became so strong that it was a matter of survival to get out of that radius. Many of the prisoners had no chance to get away from the sinking vessel. The noise of the crying animal stock around them was terrible.
What a tragic story, what a fate. Why did this priest then now come to visit Neuendettelsau and to give this story to the mission here? Did he have any relations, or was it because he knew about the face of Georg Schneider himself?
He might have seen Georg Schneider, that he had been on the ship and knew him from the mission work, and he felt himself obliged to report this event to the Neuendettelsauer mission. Only one of the Dutch ships made it to India.
What would you know about his wife and her situation after the husband was taken captive and taken away on that ship towards India?
Mrs. Schneider had heard about the pact between Hitler and Stalin in 1939 to avoid aggressing each other's country, and she had hoped in the early 40s, when she knew that internment would come, that she could make it via China and the Trans-Siberian railways back to Germany, where of course she expected to become reunited again with her 2 children and her husband. She was separated from her husband by Dutch soldiers and was brought as a captive to China, but she was also interned together with her young daughter Mathilde. And they lived there in an area which had a tradition of a German colony called Qingdao. Other Germans from different provinces of China were also interned there, but the pact between Stalin and Hitler was forfeited and the two countries had gone to war. Thus she remained for years in that camp, where also her daughter went to a German school in Tsingtao and returned only years later, around 1948, to Germany.
Yeah, very touching story. Would you know about the fate of her husband, or would she have known about the fate of her husband when she was in China? Or did they get the information about the children only here when she came back?
I don't know, but I was well aware of was that the children Fritz and Luise here were desperate to receive any news about their father, their mother and their sister, whom they had not seen for many years. I never met Mrs. Schneider myself, but I do know how tragic it was for all to finally get to know about the tragic end of the husband and father. Finally, they could reunite again in Germany. Daughter Mathilde settled in southern Bavaria and married a chemistry engineer, and he traveled a lot, gave also speeches in international conferences, and of course a very special life story of her family was always present. The two children had spent a very long time in the New Guinea children's home here in Neuendettelsau and on their own, nearly 13 years from their parents separated, until her mother returned from China. Once I asked Fritz about his relations with his mother. He told me that it was difficult to regain normal relations with his mother. He told me that it was difficult to regain normal relations with his mother due to the long and forced separation from her. Fritz still was so interested in mission himself that he started a missionary's training at the seminary here to become a missionary himself. His sister Luise married a man with the name Döbler, who himself was, interestingly, born a mission kid in New Guinea and became a pastor.
It's really unbelievable, the connection between missionary families, embedded in such a dramatic and tragic story, isn't it? All to bring the gospel to New Guinea.
Yes, the mother-in-law of Luise, Mrs. Döbler, even travelled across to New Guinea together with my mother in 1922. Imagine that Mrs. Döbler had to wait for nearly 10 years here in Germany to join her fiancé, since they had promised to marry each other already before the World War began. Both ventured to meet their promised men in New Guinea, who became then their husbands. In 1922, it was quite a group of women to travel. Most of them have already promised to their future husbands years before. My mother was a sister-in-law to a well-known pioneer missionary, Karl Mailänder, who proposed to my father, Friedrich, to check with the Mission Society to Sibylle, his future wife, my mother, would be selected to come to New Guinea to marry Friedrich Bayer. Well, he had seen a picture from her and was so impressed.
Here the picture. Yeah. Yes, for the Schneiders, a circle of missionary lives closed again. From the Neuendettelsau missionary, Father Georg Schneider, in New Guinea, across to Dutch New Guinea, and after the tragedy The family met many years again, united in Neuendettelsau. And it is interesting that again the children were ready to live or serve as missionaries overseas, and one to marry the child of a missionary. So the relation to that island and former mission was very deep, in fact.
Indeed, well, Fritz himself could not take up a missionary's work in New Guinea as he wanted, since in 1951, when he had finished his seminary, no missionary was allowed yet to enter PNG by the Australians. Therefore, he chose to serve in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Brazil, Latin America, where migrants from Germany had settled already for generations. When he completed service there, he served as a pastor of our Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bavaria, nearby Gunzenhausen. Fritz has 3 children, one of them living in northern Bavaria. Louise was trained as a children's educator. She has also 3 children. One of them became also a pastor in our church. I did keep a relationship with Louise and Fritz, since we did not only attend school together, but also had our confirmation together. We even did celebrate 50 years of confirmation together. Thus we kept the relation by meeting times and again till they died.
Thank you to lead us again through such an interesting life story and some essentials which we should know and not forget.